Good afternoon to respected dignitaries, guests of the day, HOIs of various departments, faculty members, and my dear audience. I, Pratyasha Paul, along with my co-host Shreya Pathak from BA Honours English 5th semester, are here to welcome you all. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the fourth day of the 30 hours workshop on the topic Paths to Developed India, Awakened Youth, Skill Development and Strong Leadership. Taking you back to yesterday's session, Sir enlightened us on the importance of Indian knowledge system and how we can incorporate its essence in our lives. He mentioned how oral culture becomes a necessary vehicle in the Indian culture. He also talked about how the Western culture is different from Indian culture and how important it is for us to be attuned to the culture of our own country.
Moving further, it is with my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our Honorable Director of Amity School of Languages, Professor Dr. Kumkum Raj. Her visionary leadership and unwavering commitment have been instrumental in shaping the success of our institution. Ma'am was unable to join us today as she is in a meeting, so I would like to invite Professor Satyaj Tripathi, Chief Proctor and Professor, Amity School of Languages, to say a few words.
Sir, इसी में Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am. On behalf of the Director of the Amity School of Languages and on behalf of the entire faculty, we all welcome you for the 30 hours workshop. And it's really a proud privilege for all of us. And we are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Hope the students are good from. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So shall I begin now?
Ma'am, let the anchors introduce you.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Just
Shreya,
few
Satyash.
Now, I would like to invite our guest speaker of the day, Professor Sunita Murmu. Dr. Murmu is a professor in the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Gorakhpur University. She completed her master's and MPhil in English from the Center of English and Linguistics, School of Languages, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She began her teaching career as an assistant professor at Mahila Mahavidyalaya, BHU, Varanasi, in the year 1998 and later joined the Department of English, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Gorakhpur University, Gorakhpur, in 2004. Her areas of specialization are post-colonial literature, African writing, literature and gender, and literature and environment. Apart from having published research papers in journals and chapters in books, she has co-edited two collections of critical essays, Representations and Resistance, essays on post-colonial theatre and drama, and literatures of South Asia. She possesses 25 years of teaching experience and has guided 7 research scholars under her supervision. She has also worked as coordinator of the Placement and Career Counseling Cell, DDU Gorakhpur University, and as a warden of the Women's Hostel of the university. She has recently been made the director of Mahavir Mission Teacher Training Center. Ma'am will be giving a lecture on the topic Critical Thinking Skills and the Nyaya System of Thought.
Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I wish to thank Amity University, the director of your school, the School of Languages, Professor Kumkum Ray, the organizers of this workshop, and of course Deepika, who's been my dear student. It's a pleasure to reconnect with her, and it really feels good to be part of this workshop. So thank you for this invite, and I hope I shall be able to have an interesting interactive session with you all. Am I audible and clear enough and loud?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so as Pratyasha just mentioned, my topic being critical thinking skills and the Nyaya School of Thought. Of course, I shall be mostly talking about the critical thinking skills, and I shall definitely touch upon one of the Indian systems of thought, that is the Nyaya School of Thought. And so before I begin, I'm sure as we are talking about skilling India, and we see a developed country in terms of its youth being skilled in the right manner. And one of the skills that is being, let's say, discussed uh, and much talked about in recent times as the most desired skills of the 21st century is the critical thinking skill. Okay, now what is this critical thinking skills? What do we actually mean by critical thinking skills? Haven't we all been involved in doing critical thinking skills? So let's see, or I shall be telling you exactly as to why this discussion of critical thinking skills has come up in recent times, and why is it being emphasized so much. Okay, so first of all, critical thinking skills, and this has been mentioned recently also in the National Education Policy 2020. And in fact, it is this National Education Policy 2020 that has actually brought critical thinking to the spotlight as one of the major goals. So this is being emphasized by several world bodies like the UNICEF, UNESCO, WHO, and they have lifted where they have listed critical thinking as, you know, one of the core life skills. Now, what exactly do we mean by critical thinking skills? Well, it is linked to the intellectual development of a learner. Okay, so you see, so now this focus, with the focus being on the student, it is now being seen that learning involves not simply a period of 4 to 5 years or the time that the student spends in his or her college or university, but it involves a lifelong learning process. Okay, so how do we prepare our students? How do we prepare our youth to develop certain skills which will serve them for a very long period of time? In fact, throughout their entire life. So you see, this word has become a buzzword, in fact, in recent times, and it has been seen actually as the end product of education. Okay. So somewhere along the way, it seems that critical thinking had kind of, you know, fallen by the wayside, or let's say the importance had not been given so much on that. And suddenly now it's dawned on several of the educationists or the educators that this is a particular skill that should be, you know, inculcated or included in the curriculum of the students so that it helps them throughout the entire life. And now it has been seen as the end product of education. Okay, and basically that would make a student independent. It would prepare a student for success in life. Okay, and it would also foster democratic citizenship. Okay, so it is seen as one of the core life skills of the 21st century for the upliftment of the living standards of the people. So you see, so it is not simply any ordinary skill, but it is a skill that combines both both intellectual development as well as life skills. Okay, so it is based on the principle. This entire idea of critical thinking, it is actually based on the idea. Okay, it is rather based on the principle that education should not only develop cognitive capacities, okay, meaning that the student or the child or the student should not just be able to cognize, okay, so not just his cognitive capacities, okay, such as but also critical thinking and problem solving, let's say, capacities that he must build. Not just this, but he must also, along with these skills, he must also be able to develop social, ethical, and emotional capacities and disposition. See, you see, so it is related to a particular skill that needs to be picked up, inculcated, or developed, as well as this is to be combined with certain other skills, or let's say certain other disposition or behavior that we need to build in the students. So you see, it is somewhere connected to what we so much being emphasized of what we call holistic development. Okay, this is actually what goes on to constitute what we call holistic development. So it's not just a skill, technical skill, like how you would, let's say, pick up a computer skill, you attend classes and you are skilled at doing something, but it also involves developing a certain mindset, a certain kind of a behavior, a certain disposition. So you see, it talks about a way in which you also build character. Okay. Now, character not in the simple way as to how you must conduct yourself, but how you ought to look at the society around you, how you need to relate to the people around you, how you need to relate to the diverse groups of people around you, be it in terms of, let's say, class, caste, religion, region, whatever. So you see, so all of these skills need to be combined also with certain very scientific ways of analyzing the reality around you or interpreting reality. And this is being emphasized all the more because you see, we are living in an age when there is a profusion of information. You see, in a digital age, you see everywhere you are bombarded with information. So where there is so much of information around, please excuse just a sec, please. Uh, Sorry for that. Okay. So in a time, okay. So at a time when, we are living in a time where we find so much of information around us. We are bombarded with information. So have we developed the skills to process that information? Because what happens is that we at times are not able to decide as to what should be accepted, what should be discarded, what should be taken with how much seriousness, and what should not be actually be, and we should not bother about certain, let's say, piece of information. What should concern us? So, there is a need to develop certain skills, which we call critical thinking skills, where we are able to process so much of information. Okay. So you see, this is a skill that is so much been emphasized that we need to develop this skill. Now let me go back a little, go back to the earlier education policy that was framed. And earlier on, of course, the policy, the education policy, the emphasis, of course, was on education, but the emphasis was more on theoretical knowledge, and also the emphasis was how. Please, I request to put yourself on mute, so that okay. So now with so much of innovations in education happening, okay, so the focus is now on enhancing the higher order cognition. These are considered higher order cognition skills, as well as the creative potential of the learner. So you see, it combines both. You develop a certain skill, as well as you work on the potential of the learner. Okay, what potential? You see, so some people have naturally developed critical thinking skills. Some need to pick up those skills, or those skills need to be developed in those learners. You see, so this is a higher order skill. And when we talk about holistic development, it involves all of this. Okay, and it also involves in what in recent times we have been so much emphasizing, is that of interdisciplinary learning. Okay, where you do not remain in your watertight compartments in the areas that you're pursuing. You do not just keep yourself limited to your field of knowledge, but you also interact with other disciplines, where, because you must have seen in the education system, where earlier we were confined to, or we basically studied within the disciplines that we had chosen. Now there is an emphasis, and there is there are efforts being made to encourage students to opt for courses outside the disciplinary fields. Okay, why? Because there is so much of knowledge out there, which is there at the intersections of those both these disciplines, and which would kind of give or provide solutions to so much of problems. Now, let me give you a very simple example. What happened was, you see what happened during the COVID. Now, actually, if you look at the pandemic, and I'm sure you all must have experienced what people were going through. So it was not just a medical health issue. It was not just a medical problem where you went to the doctor, got yourself a pack of medicines, and you treated yourself. You look at the let's say the effect it had on these entire society, in both the social, in terms of the social and its cultural aspect. You see, people were confined to their homes, interaction stopped, we had to switch to the digital mode. Communication, direct communication was not there. People were looking for new ways of communicating. You see, the way people went about buying, you have the surgence of online buying that went up, and how people's lives were affected, not just let's say medically, or let's say from the medical point of view, but social, cultural, and economic point of view. So you see, so a solution to a complex problem like COVID could not have been addressed simply by the availability of vaccines. You see, that could not have been tackled. It had to be tackled on so many levels. One had to think of all those migrants who had left their homes, how they would be rehabilitated, how would they be sent back home. So you see, there are so many adjustments and arrangements had to be made in order to address that very complex problem. Okay, so you see, so all these issues kind of and how you see, when we talk about digital, there were it created problems, it created a dent also in education. You found, I'm sure you found, that those people who were privileged, who were from a better social class, they had access to smartphones, access to laptops or computers, they could attend online classes. But there were the underprivileged lot who did not have access to that. That needed to be addressed. So you see, so the repercussions were so wide. So now, to deal with such a complex problem, naturally it was felt that there should be a move towards a more interdisciplinary approach, not just when it comes to studies, but when it comes to research. And also it affected issues of gender. You see, people who were women or children, they became more vulnerable. They were subjected to so much of violence at home, because usually what happened was when they went out or went out for work, they probably fared better or they did well. But being within the household, in some households it created a lot of problems. So you see, so there were so many issues. So you see, it was felt that it is necessary that one must have an interdisciplinary approach to several complex problems in society. So you see, the NEP kind of emphasizes all of this when it comes to talking about, even when we talk about critical thinking. See, these are all connected. When we talk about interdisciplinary studies, we are in a way also encouraging the development of critical thinking skills. Okay, now there was this also summit called the Transforming Education Summit in 2022, and where it actually also analyzed the pandemic situation, and it pointed out that there was as such a global crisis in education. It was found that there indeed is a big problem. There is actually a global crisis in education. It was, I mean, studied over there. It was analyzed that there was this global crisis in education across nations, and taking a lifelong approach, starting from right from the primary level, the pre-primary level, to the adult education. It was found that it was necessary to equip all learners with critical competencies. Okay, critical competencies covering not just knowledge and awareness of things, okay, not just not, but also socio emotional skills and behavior. Okay, so that is what let's say the outcome of this summit was, where it was felt that this is what needs to be inculcated. If people develop critical thinking abilities, if people develop these competencies, which involves socio-economic skills and behavior, okay, and critical thinking, this would kind of this is what became the agenda that was set for the future, okay, during this summit. Okay, so that is why the new role of critical thinking in the educational context is being discussed not just at the national level but also globally. So this is let's say a very pertinent or an important skill that is being discussed everywhere. And how do we kind of let's say incorporate that in our curriculum? Now let me tell you very clearly that the NEP actually does talk about developing critical thinking skills, but it does not very clearly spell out as to how do we go about it. Okay, how do we, which is the right way to develop critical thinking skills? But there have been educators, they are educationists who have kind of thrown light, who have those who came up with the theory of critical thinking, how it has been there already existing. People have kind of summarized that, and we have tenets about critical thinking as what it involves, and how probably we can kind of include that in our curriculum. So you see, this is an important subject. Okay, and we find that the issue of critical thinking is not something very new. Okay, this was long back, 2005 years ago also. It goes right back to Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all these renowned thinkers. Or even if you look at the Indian knowledge system, the Indian knowledge traditions, it has always been there. In fact, even if you talk about the Vedas, you talk about the different major schools, the Jains, the Buddhists, the Charvaks, major schools, and the philosophical, the different schools of thought, that is Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Yoga, these schools of thought, all thinking involves, all these schools of thought involves critical thinking. So, it's not something which is very new, but somewhere along the way, somewhere in our education system, this had kind of, we can say, had fallen by the wayside. Okay, this had been kind of ignored, and not that it wasn't there actually, but the focus was not so much on it. The focus was not so much on developing these skills. Okay, it was of course there, but now the emphasis is that we should bring back, or let's say kind of actually formulate a way as to how we go about including that in our curriculum, and how we go about also inculcating and developing, let's say, these skills in our learners. Okay. So this kind of this critical thinking, or what we may also call independent thinking as a process, this had, as I said, gained importance long back in the Indian Vedic literature. You can see, and especially when I talk about the Nyaya school of thought or the Nyaya system of thought, where actually very meticulously certain rules have, the methods have been laid down about inquiry. It is actually a system of thought which talks about reasoning, talks about logical reasoning, talks about analyzing, talks about perceptions, talks about inference. How do you infer? You see, so the thing is, it lays actually emphasis on how do you process information? How do you come to know about the ultimate reality? And there is a very clear-cut method put in there, okay, as to how you go about analyzing and filtering what is the right information, filtering the right information, right knowledge. How do we arrive at correct knowledge or valid knowledge? Okay. Okay. So you see, so even though it was let's say not mentioned as such, or defined as such, but it was very much, it has always very much been there in the tradition, and now the importance of this skill is being emphasized. So in general terms, if we were to define critical thinking, it states that it can be defined as the process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information. You see, so right, as I stated right at the beginning, it is how you process the information. So it involves all of this: conceptualizing, skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach an answer or conclusion that leads to or enables problem solving. So ultimately, the objective is problem solving. If you are able to analyze correctly, if you are able to assess correctly, evaluate correctly, obviously of any problem or any issue, what happens is you are able to arrive at a certain solution to a certain problem. So basically, how do you process information? So that's the main important question as to how do you process the information. And in the context of education, you see, critical thinking, it can thus be considered a combination, as I said right at the beginning, combination of abilities, okay, and disposition, okay. And what is this ability? The ability is to analyze argument, draw conclusions, okay, and using both inductive and deductive reasoning, okay. So either you observe things around you. In the case of inductive, so certain observations, you arrive at certain basic truths or knowledge or information, okay. If you read Francis Bacon, you know he basically follows in his essays, uses the inductive method, okay. And the other is the deductive reasoning, from the particular to the general. Then you make judgments, evaluations, and make decisions and solve problems, ask and receive clarifications. You seek questions, okay, recognize assumptions. Now you see so many of these, let's say, finer distinctions, okay. So you are able to recognize assumptions, that these are just assumptions. They may not necessarily be factual or the truth. These are certain assumptions. Interpret, you're able to interpret the information and facts that are around you, okay. So the right interpretation is required, and also to explain, to see the both sides of an argument. So if there is any kind of a statement or an argument on any issue, you are able to assess it from all perspectives. You are able to see it from several perspectives, and not just see it from any one single perspective. And this is what the Indian tradition has also, the Indian knowledge tradition has been very rich about. You see, any kind of knowledge, that is not been stated as the absolute and the ultimate. There are several other ways of approaching that reality or truth. And there are so many options. You can either see it that way, or you see, so it has always been open to very plural, ways of looking at a particular, or arriving at a particular truth. So this is what it emphasizes, critical thinking, that you do not look at any issue from any one single perspective. Okay, because seeing or deciding on the basis on any one single perspective would definitely prove that it is a very prejudiced or a biased view. You need to see the other person's perspective. Okay, so there are, it is stated that there are 5 overlapping elements about critical thinking, and these include analytic and synthetic abilities, whether if you're able to analyze or not, analytic, and whether synthesize meaning the information that you are able to get from the situation or the problem. Objectivity, a certain distancing from the issue that is being discussed or the argument that is being handled. Anticipation of consequences, that if you take such a decision, if you kind of settle on this argument, what would be the fallout of that? What will eventually happen? Okay, so anticipation of consequences. Intelligence, and let me tell you, even intelligence, this is also being discussed, because often it is also being said that a person may be very well educated, may be very well read, but still may be lacking in intelligence. So this is something that a person needs to use his or her intelligence. Okay, and logical thinking. So you cannot just arrive at a certain understanding of a problem simply by seeing it only from any one single perspective. So you need to look at it from several perspectives, and this several perspectives can come from certain directions. Okay, certain areas, certain fields, certain persons, with people with certain different abilities. Okay, so the nature of critical thinking is therefore multifaceted. It is multifaceted, and its attributes change according to the discipline it is placed in. Okay, so depending on which discipline within which we are discussing critical thinking abilities or skills, it changes. Now, one of the very good ways of, let's say, inculcating the critical thinking skills, and it is said that it is in the humanities and arts and the fine arts that it is very much there, So that is why it is being insisted that even if you must have seen even in all the technical institutes, that the students ought to be also taught the arts and the humanities. The important. Now, there is a very important book by Martha Nussbaum. If you get an opportunity, please do read it. She speaks or advocates so much for the humanities. She talks about why it is very essential to teach humanities, the arts and the humanities, because it actually has those lessons, or let's say it includes those texts which build critical thinking abilities in students. Now, she gives one example where she says that how it was developed in a particular university in the US, where the students they in a law school, let's say, and they were given a case, and what students were made to do, they were made to take different positions. Some could be the judge, some could be the victim, some could be the lawyer defending the person, some could be the lawyer fighting against the case. And a student who believed that in such a case, the response would be this, or this is how the judgment should happen, because what the teacher made that particular student do is why don't you become the defending lawyer? Why don't you defend the person who has committed whatever is accused of committing? Why don't you take the other position instead of what you assume is the right? Now, what happened now, that became a challenge for the student, because so far he had gone with this particular idea that what he thought of the particular case was absolutely correct. He had interpreted it the right way, or he had arrived at a certain judgment that, considering the case, this is what should be. The person is at fault and he should be punished. But having made by the teacher to take a different stance, to take a stance where he has to defend the person, so that became challenging for him. He had to actually think and study the person's case very carefully. Of course, this was just a class experiment. But you see, now the person could actually see what happens on the other side. So it is when you put yourself in the other person's shoes, will you be able to act? Now, if you've read, I think most of you all must have read To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's a wonderful text. You must have seen, I mean, you must have read in the story how the main character, he kind of, the lawyer, he defends a person, you know, against whom a judgment is made on the basis of prejudice. And because it is a white society, predominantly white society, it is assumed that the person, the black person, he must be at fault. He must be the one who must have committed the crime. And it is just a case of a prejudiced, judgment. And despite knowing, I mean, it is taken for granted that because he's a black, he's the one who has committed. Okay. But of course, the lawyer, he kind of actually fights against that. And that is what is the education he gives you. Because that is what he tells his daughter. Okay. That it is very important to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see what the person is going through. So until unless you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you see things from the other person's perspective, you will never be able to understand the condition of what the other person goes through. So you see, so this is a skill which can only happen in a text of literature. Maybe it is through that you can teach a student, you can communicate, or in certain such exercises, even in theater, where you have different students take certain characters. And let's say if somebody has to play the victim or something, and probably a person who may in real life may not actually be facing those conditions, but if asked to take a position, such a position, it is through activities, theatrical activities, that the person understands as to, you know, what it is to be in a particular situation, what it is to be in a particular, let's say, in a particular person's shoes. So you see, it is activities, theatrical activities, which enhance, you know, so it enhances that person's not just critical thinking ability, it also improves his interpersonal skills. There is active learning. Okay, the person's, there is active learning, there is listening, there is motivating, there is reflecting, because the person now begins to reflect, because where the person was not given to, you know, the person had kind of, you may have taken for granted, okay, this is how this is how things appear, this is how I always know. So somewhere you are being made to question. So you can go back to Socrates and all, where the emphasis was, you know, to question. So that is, once again, this activity is being, you know, emphasized, that we should, in our classrooms, we should go back to once again encouraging our students to ask questions, make a statement, let there be counter arguments, and then you arrive at certain answers. So, you know, this, until unless there is these dialogues, until unless there is this kind of interaction, until unless there is this questioning, you cannot build critical thinking skills. So it is in such activities, it is in such texts where you're made to think, where you're made to reflect, that one can build these critical thinking skills. And once you develop these critical things, it leads to problem solving. You see, these are not disconnected, but very much connected. Once you have developed these critical thinking skills, automatically it helps in uh, uh, leading to, or it brings about solutions to certain problems that we are looking for. Now, if you look at the critical thinking skills in the Indian educational context, as I said, it is because of this exponential, you know, doubling of new information. Okay, it becomes necessity that we develop these skills, because these skills help an individual to become more adaptable. Okay, so instead of making you rigid, very, let's say, fossilized in a way in your views, where you're not willing to alter your views, critical thinking helps the individuals to become more adaptable, flexible, and be able to cope with the information inflation, if we may, you know, call it so. Okay, with so much of information around us, and especially in the age of what we would call post-truth. Okay, where so much of, you know, with the bombarding of information, with the kind of, you see the videos circulating, certain news reels becoming viral. Okay, so in what happens is that, what you find, that often we are led to make decisions on the basis of emotion, Okay, it is sometimes, most often, we make emotional, or it is emotion that shapes our decisions, or public opinion. So instead of getting swayed by emotion or making emotional judgments, okay, simply being swayed by what is being circulated without looking at what the objective facts are, it is in such times that critical thinking really becomes a necessity, okay, where the need arises to analyze, evaluate, and synthesize the information that we receive. So especially you must be aware, there's so much of circulation of information, either on WhatsApp or social media. How do you filter that? How do you filter what is genuine information, what is being just circulated for kind of creating a certain public opinion? Okay, how do you kind of analyze that? How do you interpret this information? So this ability to see through all of this, it is what critical thinking tries to do, okay, to develop those skills. So critical thinking helps people to just identify, differentiate information and misinformation. Okay, so it becomes important in such times. How did you distinguish which is what is right information and what is misinformation? Okay, so this difference between information, misinformation. Okay, this has become very important, and that we need to work it out. Okay, now the importance of critical thinking, this picked up, this gained momentum due to the influence of John Dewey. Okay, he was an American philosopher, lived from 1859 to 1952, and he was an educator, a psychologist, and in fact, now he is regarded as the father of critical thinking. In fact, even he did not really use the word critical thinking. He actually used reflective thinking, but in fact, he used the word actually interchangeably. He also used it for critical thinking. And now critical thinking has been developed as a discipline, and it has been now being examined in depth. So not that it wasn't there, it was always there, but he gave it a more formal experience. He developed it as a separate discipline. So now it has kind of picked up in recent times. Even Martha Nussbaum talks about John Dewey. In fact, she also talks about the style of the education system that Rabindranath Tagore developed in Shantiniketan. Okay, so she picks up all of these the ideologies behind the educationists, the educators, the thought as to what were the skills that they were actually trying to build in the students, in the learners. Okay, so she talks about both Dewey and Tagore, and so critical thinking helps in, let's say, forming unbiased judgment. Okay, it helps in kind of processing information in the right way. So critical thinking in recent times has become very important as a discipline. Now, if you look at the Indian education system, as I also mentioned in the beginning, that earlier on, most of what was being taught, or the syllabuses syllabi that we had, it kind of mostly emphasized the importance was not so much given to critical thinking. The emphasis was more on memorizing content. Very few, I think, were we asked, or to offer critical views. Okay, only maybe in some institutions where the efforts were there, and luckily I had the opportunity to be at an institution where we were made to take a stand, made to think critically, approach an issue or a text in a manner that opened up our minds. Okay, ultimately the effort is to move away from biased judgment to opening up the minds of the individuals, of the learners, and to make ourselves more adaptable and flexible. Okay, so earlier on, where the effort, I mean the purpose, or let's say most of the emphasis in the system, the earlier education system, was more on memorizing content. It was the assessment of knowledge, or basically recollection. Okay, recollection of knowledge, and and not much effort was paid to the assessment of higher order skills. You see, I don't think we really look at whether we have been able to develop the higher order skills of the students or not. Okay, we are not usually the focus. Usually, the focus isn't whether the student has learnt up whatever was taught in the class. So ultimately it is a test of memory. It is a test of whether the person is able to recollect all that was kind of handed down or was given to the student, whether the person is able to reproduce all of that. So you see, so whether the person has the ability or has higher thinking order skills or not, we are not able to assess that. You see, so this method of the earlier, that is the method, this has faced certainly a lot of criticism, and that is now why, and the emphasis is now being made um, on developing critical thinking skills, or let's say enabling our students to develop an in-depth understanding of the subject, where the person is actually able to analyze, interpret, critically, let's say, assess something. Okay. Now, now why this happened? If you go back as to what was the reason as to why this situation came up, where this was kind of sidelined. If you look at colonization, it was basically colonialism which left India with this, a distorted education system. One of the main reasons was colonialism, that we had this distorted, ended up with this distorted education system, where the focus was obviously more on theoretical knowledge rather than practical knowledge. Now, if you look at NEP also, it puts so much of emphasis on experiential learning. Why experiential learning? Because now it has been seen that what the student learns in the classroom and what happens in the world outside, or if he were to suggest something, there is so much of a disconnect with what is happening in the world outside and what is being taught in the classrooms. Okay, so once again, kind of make that connect. So this somewhere it seems the knowledge that has been gained in the classroom has not been able, the learner has not been able to use this outside. Of course, I'm not talking about those professional skills where you learn actual technical skills and you are able to build a car or a machine or whatever. I'm not talking about those. But there are several other disciplines where certain knowledge that you may have gained somewhere, you are not being able to, let's say, work it out in the actual. So it is very important to actually get a first-hand knowledge as to what is the reality of it, and how do you kind of innovatively look for solutions to that with the knowledge that you may have gained in the classroom. So somewhere, hence, I mean, somewhere because of this disconnect, there is this emphasis now again in our classrooms on, let's say, experiential. I mean, okay, it's all right for those subjects where you have practical classes where you're out on the field serving. That's absolutely fine. But there are several subjects in the arts and the humanities where you do not really actually work out your skills, or you test your knowledge out, or how do you bring that, or how do you, let's say, use it as okay. So now because of the lack of emphasis on practical knowledge, the need was felt to, let's say, once again work on the critical thinking skills. But the see, and the reason, as I said, was it was colonialism which actually kind of had kind of um, sidelined the issue of critical thinking. And you are all aware of the very famous minutes on Indian education by Thomas Macaulay in 1835, who passed the English Education Act, and he introduced English and Western educational concepts. Okay, where he said that according to him, that his famous statement that he wanted to groom the native Indians to be a class of anglicized class, to work for Britain's growing empire, class of persons in the growing empire, class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Okay, so we are, most of all are aware of this. Okay, so, but before, it should also be noted that before um, the British system of education was introduced, India had its own traditional indigenous system of education and knowledge. So this is what is being emphasized, that whatever may have been the effects of colonialism, we may have been products of a distorted educational system, but we can always go back. And because there was already a tradition, you can always go back to those traditions, and probably we could again incorporate that within our curriculum. Okay, so the Western approach therefore kind of neglected this rational and critical thinking, and inadvertently this has been carried over generation after generation. But now efforts are being made to rectify that, to change that. There were all these national education commissions, which worked on all of these. They tried to analyze, okay, the main aspects of the Indian education system. And it is with this new education policy, where we are kind of once again trying to um, decolonize, what you may say, decolonize the entire education system, and bringing those skills that were already there, which had been uh, kind of um, marginalized or kind of had been put away because of certain other systems of education that were introduced, which kind of affected certain genuine skills, which the need for it, which has been now felt, and probably which we had large reserves of it. We need to again go back to all of that. Okay, so NEP 2020 now focuses on these thinking skills and in the holistic development of the pupil, of the learner, and it is also the development of the moral values and vocational skills of the students, so as to make them eligible as better humans when they are ready to choose when they are ready to choose a career. Okay, so you see the emphasis on holistic development. So this skill, essentially critical thinking skills, is being emphasized. So it is essential in the educational system, because as I said, it helps the student, it would help the student to analyze, synthesize, evaluate, make unbiased decisions. Okay, so it is about two abilities, the twin abilities. The twin abilities, number one, knowing how to learn. Okay, number one, knowing how to learn, and knowing how to think clearly about the surge in information that is around. So you not only learn, okay, not only you are supposed to know how do you go about your learning, okay, and also how do you think. So you see, so it is an intellectual development. It is the end product. Ultimately, you should be able to think, make unbiased, not just think, but make unbiased judgment on the basis of correct thinking, right thinking, and especially in a digitalized world. Okay, filtering the uh, vast amount of information uh, around you, identifying the required information. That is, what critical thinking also calls for, that you are able to identify also what information is required, what is required. So integrating critical thinking skills into the language curricula, into the culture curriculum. Okay, this would enhance the cognitive life skills. Okay, while also let's say helping uh, to develop the educational system as well as the curricula. And educators are now emphasizing, or they have become very interested in kind of teaching these thinking skills of various kinds. Okay, um, instead of focusing on information and content. Please excuse me just a sec. Take this. Hello. हाँ busy हो थोड़ी देर बाद. So now the emphasis, you see, because you see now why even teachers and educators have to focus more on critical thinking skills, For the simple reason, look, when it comes to information, suppose we teach a text. When it comes to information about the text, it is all over the internet. A student just has to Google and it's the same. So if the teacher is also doing the same and the student is also doing the same, so where is the contribution of the teacher? So it becomes important for the teacher that we need to do something else beyond passing on information, because the information is already out there. The students already have it with them. You see, hence you also find the decrease in the interest of the students to attend a particular class, because they feel they can get the same information from elsewhere. So that means there is a need to refocus. I mean, where do we place the focus on? So because if that is not required, then what is required? Okay, because the students already have those information. But the critical thinking skills is an ability that can only be developed in the classroom when you make the student think of certain issues from certain perspectives, remove their prejudices and biases, and you make them think with clarity. And that can only happen when we make a classroom very engaging, interactive. As I said, when you make them ask certain questions, you pose difficult questions in the class, or when the students pose with some very difficult, disturbing questions in the class, that is when you kind of help in building these critical thinking skills. So somewhere we need to, because you see, as I said, information and teaching information and content cannot be now our the reason for going to the classroom, simply because the content information is already there. So are we able to develop these thinking skills in our students? So in the with this policy, with the NEP 2020, you see this particular skill has received a lot of importance, and this is what is being emphasized. And to come back to, as I said, the Indian philosophical tradition, or the six systems of thought, and especially the Nyaya system of thought. Why I emphasize on the Nyaya system of thought? Because actually, if you even look at the Western tradition, as I said, if you look at Socrates, look at his dialogues, even go to Plato's Socrates and his, and then you go to Plato's dialogues, and you see the discussion, the question-answer pattern, the argument that goes on. There's an argument, there's a counter argument, and then you kind of logically you analyze, you reason, and then you arrive at a particular truth or a statement. Okay, so that kind of argument, this has always been the tradition in the Indian knowledge system. If you look at Amartya Sen's The Argumentative Indian, he actually talks about all these traditions which have always been there, where we've always had a plural, the plurality of ideas have always been there. And why I emphasize Nyaya? Because Nyaya system of thought actually puts a lot of emphasis on reasoning and logic. And it is one of the schools where all schools actually talk about knowing the ultimate truth and reality. It is only the Nyaya school which actually formulates a method. It has actually put down a very clear-cut methods as to how you arrive at right knowledge. Okay, so you see that the very systematically it has kind of come up with a system where it has certain categories, certain words which you may have heard, some you may not have heard, and those are actually philosophical ideas. Those are small philosophical principles on the basis of which you arrive at the ultimate reality or the ultimate truth. Okay, so where all systems of thought talk about finding the ultimate reality, even Nyaya talks about, but it is the only school, it is unique. This particular school is unique, for it actually kind of, it recognizes the need for and the priority of a method. It sets down a method. So you can see it's already, it's been there. Okay, and this Nyaya system, the school was founded by a sage named Gautama. Okay, and they kind of prioritize this method, and also for its, they give very explicit and elaborate formulation of the principles of inquiry. So if you are inquiring, if knowledge has to be found, knowledge has to be arrived at, what should be the method of inquiry? Okay, so that categorically puts down all of that. So this is one of the schools, let's say, of the six systems of thought. I talks about the canons of correct thinking. It talks about valid reasoning, as methodological tools. Okay, these are tools for acquiring knowledge of reality. Okay, so it gives emphasis on that. And in fact, Nyaya system has also been referred to as the Tark Shastra, the science of reasoning, or simply logic. Okay, so it is basically a system of thought which believes in a very clear formulation of the criteria of valid knowledge. Okay, so if one is to arrive at valid knowledge, what should be the criteria? Okay, so it lists very elaborate, methods and principles. Okay, so this was the earliest school of the Nyaya school, is basically the from where the ideas come is from the Nyaya Sutras, the principles of Nyaya, as I said, of Gautam of the 3rd century BC. Of course, there were subsequent Nyaya schools, and you will find a lot of commentaries on the first school of thought, on the principles of this Nyaya or the Nyaya Sutras. There are comments on that. You have Vatsyan's Nyaya Bhashya, you have Udyotara's Udyotkaras Nyaya Vartika. So these are various latest schools. You have modern Nyaya also, which works on those principles. They are all connected. They are not separate as such, and they work on the different principles on the different sutras, and there are commentaries or arguments based on the earlier texts. The modern Nyaya, the founder of that is Gangesh, and his work is Navya Nyaya Tattva Chintamani. This is work, so I'm not going into the history of all of that. And as I said, it is very difficult because the arguments are so intricate. It works on each and every sutra, and the commentaries that are there on. So if there is someone who stated those sutras, there are again counter arguments to that, again arguments on that. Okay, so what the Nyaya Sutra does is it lists 16 16 principles, or 16 padarthas, it's called. Okay, 16 categories, rather, not principles, 16 categories. And these categories, these are all philosophical topics, and these are 16 categories by which you arrive at valid knowledge. Okay, now let me tell you, I won't go into all these 16 categories, but just to name them. Okay, so that Praman, okay, it is basically the way in which we come to know anything truly and objectively. This Prameya is anything that can be known truly and objectively. Sanshay, or doubt, okay, doubt or lack of certainty. Okay, you see, doubt also bringing about a certain knowledge, but what kind of a knowledge would you put that in? That is also a kind of a knowledge, but invalid. Okay, so Prayojana, Drishtant, okay, where basically there is any fact or state of affairs concerning which there is no dispute, meaning it is kind of an illustration. It serves as an instance of a certain truth, certain general truth or principle. These words, I'm sure you can even understand some of them. Siddhant is basically theory or doctrine, okay, which is held by a particular. Yes.
Ma'am, just
Can you
sorry
please
for the.
wind up in a few
Yes, ma'am.
minutes?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
almost done.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Just one.
Then there's Tark.
Yes.
Basically, Tark is a way of demonstrating the truth of a certain claim. Tark, you can understand. Okay. Nirnay, arriving at is true and certain knowledge that is arrived at by the application of the right means. Okay, legitimate means. And of course, I won't name all of them, the 16 names. And there are also ways by which you can the wrong ways of debating also. You can use the mention of Chal is a device by which one of the disputants can use to dodge a question, okay, or objection. So also the other aspects are mentioned where sometimes people can argue on a wrong note or something something that is incorrect. So it refers to all of this. Okay, and then coming to a little about their idea of knowledge, what Nyaya talks about knowledge. So for Nyaya, it is according to Nyaya, knowledge is not essential, but it is an aspect of this. It is an adventitious property. It's a growth of the self. And for Nyaya, Nyaya, knowledge is different both from the knowing subject, the person who knows about something, and the object. You see? So Nyaya compares, they compare knowledge to what is called the light of the lamp. Okay? So light of the lamp, which reveals the lamp, as well as the objects around it. Okay. So the light is different from both the lamp and the objects. Okay. So you see, so they make a very fine distinction about when it comes to knowledge. Of course, as I said in the beginning, according to them, what are the the valid means of knowledge? How do you go about inquiring or arriving at true knowledge? They state basically four major points. That is perception, inference, comparison, and testimony. Okay, so perception, and they also talk about both valid and invalid knowledge. You must have heard Sir speak also that even invalid knowledge is important. For example, invalid knowledge would for memory would fall in invalid. It is knowledge, but you see recollection of something may not really be correct. There may be doubts about that. So that is also some knowledge, but that is put in the category of invalid knowledge. Okay. Then you have we can talk about just a second. Then we come to perception. After perception, then if we talk about perception, what they talk about perception is when the self, the mind, that is the manas, the sense organs, and the object, when they come into contact. Okay, when you're able to perceive something, it is the direct and basically the immediate cognition produced by this interaction between the object and the sense organs. That is when perception happens. That is, and again, perception. They talk about. As I said, there are very minute, let's say, categories. Okay, so even in perception, they talk about two kinds of perception. There's indeterminate and the determinate. The indeterminate, for example, you walk into an orchard and you see apples. So for the first instance, you are able to just sense. There is this visual sensation. Kind of you can just sense that yes, there are apples around. There's something that you can sense, maybe through this smell, but that's an indeterminate. Later on, as you see clearly, as you go to it, when you actually kind of assess that, what you first less sensed in the first instance, okay, the sense visualization of that, the raw sensation, okay, then you are able to again fit it into categories, and you are able to say, okay, it is of this shape, it is of this color, it is of this particular taste, it is that particular size. Now that is again a determinate perception. You see, so it is perception, but there are two stages to that perception. Okay, so I'm very briefly kind of touching upon this. So you see, even when it comes to perception, what are the categories of perceiving something or perceiving an object? Again, they make a distinction between inference and perception. The second point is means of knowledge is inference, and perception gives us immediate knowledge, but inference basically gives us what we would call mediate knowledge, or let's say इसको कहते हैं परोक्ष ज्ञान. इसमें अपरोक्ष ज्ञान होता है perception में, इसमें परोक्ष ज्ञान meaning अनुमान. Okay, you kind of infer something, and so it is a process of reasoning. So you reason out, you infer knowledge, or you gain knowledge through inference. Okay. And there is a very famous example you may have also heard about. There is the smoke on the hill. There is smoke on the hill, and therefore there is fire on the hill. So the idea that you infer, and on the basis of what you logically argue that in earlier cases you posit again an instance where it was seen that because of the fire there was smoke, and hence there is fire on the hill. So you see, from seeing, perceiving smoke, you kind of infer because in an earlier case. And the reverse opposite argument can also be made, because when such a thing was not seen, meaning in the absence of fire there was no smoke, hence hence there is no fire, and so therefore no smoke. So the other argument can also be made. So this is inference, and of course later on you have comparison, that is upamana. They talk about that when you make comparisons, and of course comparisons, upamana, when he says, he actually talks about the word and the object. He says, for example, what the sutra says is, for example, you have to teach a child about a zebra, a child who hasn't seen a zebra, and how would you make him understand what a zebra looks like? So what do? You tell him that it looks like a donkey, it has stripes in black and white, and so next time when he sees a zebra, he's able to identify it. But again, also that is dependent on his knowledge about what a donkey looks like, about what he means by stripes, about what the color black and white mean. Okay, so you see these categories he should be aware, because if he's not familiar with those terms and concepts, he will not be able to fit those terms and concepts into the object when he actually sees it. Okay, so these are the ideas that is spoken about when it is spoken about comparison. And then of course testimony. Testimony basically means who you can rely on. Okay, so if something is being reported, whether the person is trustworthy or not. Okay, so and on what grounds is this person being considered trustworthy or reliable, and how far can his word be taken for the truth. Okay, so testimony basically means. So these, I just basically enumerated all of this because Nyayic system of thought kind of very meticulously uh, discusses all of these categories which are not there in other systems. And these ideas have long before also, they have been so much part of the Indian tradition of critical thinking. So hence, this is one of the most, in fact, there was this survey in the United States, and most of the employers complained that most of the students that had graduated, they lacked critical thinking skills and communication skills and hence problem solving skills. So since all these skills are very important, and NEP therefore kind of has discussed or have mentioned, NEP mentions this particular skills, and this is being considered as the most desired skill of the 21st century. Now we need to devise ways as to how we can, I've suggested some ways we can go about developing these skills in our learners. And it is open to innovation, and we can all bring our own experiences to the classroom to develop these skills in our learners. So with these words, I thank you all for your patient listening. So over to you, Deepshika, as I can see you there.
Ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was wonderful listening to you after 20 years. Yes, Rashi ma'am. Rashi ma'am, can you hear me?
Pratyasha?
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your insights were truly enlightening. On behalf of everyone here today, I want to extend our sincere gratitude for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Your contribution to this workshop has been invaluable and will take us to new heights. Thank you for all your attention and participation throughout this session. As we come to the end of this session, we have one final opportunity to engage with the esteemed speaker. To all the participants, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box or use the raise hand feature. Once recognized, you can unmute yourself to ask the question directly.
Yes, Nana.
Good afternoon, ma'am. As mentioned by you, that arts and humanities have the ability to develop critical thinking skills in a person. But still, our society do not look this stream as a very prominent one. What do you think that they look this stream with a so down thinking? Why it's not so prominent?
Exactly. That is what we need to emphasize. People do not realize that, these are the skills and competencies that are required to solve the problems of the society. There are certain problems, and especially with COVID, we did see that, it was not a cure that only the doctors could, it was a problem that only the doctors could handle. It was not a case where only the doctors, you must have realized, psychologists were required, right? Let's say people, let's say working other fields were required. So you just don't require, you require mentoring, you require care, and it's not just medicine that was the solution to the problem. So when you have a situation which is so complex and a problem that are so complex, because you see, as we are progressing, I'm sure new kinds of problem are coming up, you see. So any approach to any problem cannot be from any one particular discipline, As I said, doctors only did not have the answer to the COVID problem. There were social problems, there were cultural problems, there were economic problems. Okay, so how would you deal with all of that? So it was only realized that it was competencies like critical thinking skills that would enable, because you have to assess the situation, you have to evaluate it, you have to see how can we go about sorting out that issue. And this is, as I said, it's subjects like the art and the humanities that is required. And this was actually the reason also why, the earlier all technical institutes, it was mandatory for them to have also the arts and the humanities. And of course, you have now all universities being asked to open all disciplines. It's not just restricted to any one particular, specialized discipline or area. So that is why, but of course, the fact is that we do see that when it comes to the sciences, it is always the arts and the humanities that, are pushed to the back. We are not seen as important subjects to be studied and taught. And often what happens is, often the let's say release of funds, or when it comes to grants, we find it's the sciences people who bag most of the funds or the grants, and it is always the arts and where we are left in the lurch. It's not so much granted to those in the arts and the humanities. So there is always this struggle, there's always this fight. And you do have people like, those especially in the US and all, the same situation did it. And you have people like Martha Nussbaum, who advocates so strongly for the importance and the role of the humanities. So you cannot do away with it. It is equally important. And that is why we need to bring it center stage. Why we need to emphasize the importance of this. And that is why NEP has kind of made it, made it as an important point in the policy, that these also needs to be inculcated. Okay. So hence I'm also speaking, advocating that we need to build all these skills. And it is especially the arts and the humanities which can take a lead in this.
Okay, Naina, thanks for the question. Who's the next one? Yashashvi Singh. Yashashvi, can you hear me? Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, my question would be that, as you said, that in order to develop critical thinking skills, one needs to develop themselves holistically. So this would also include being creative and developing creativity. So how should we exactly tap into our creative potentials in order to develop these skills?
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, I think every individual is born with unique abilities. You have you have unique talents, you have certain creativity. Any solution to look, see, creativity is there everywhere. Any innovations that take place. Now, just for example, just imagine, did you ever think that there would come a time when you would be sitting at home and ordering food online, or a system where the food comes right at your doorstep and you don't have to move out, you can easily buy, and you can so you see it is all these basically creatively thinking, and you think of innovations. So this is how you bring creativity into it. How can you think, how do you look for a solution to your problem? So you see, so you have to think out of the box. That is why the emphasis so much is on out of the box thinking. So you don't go by something that you have been fed with, all these years you're teaching and all that. So you have to think a little out of the box. Think for solutions which are, not part of what you have only studied. Look around you. And where would you get this, out thinking? Look at how Bisleri also started. There was this person who was just, traveling, and then he discovered that, it just struck him that what if he were to bottle all this water? Okay. And look, I mean, everywhere you only get bottled water these days. You hardly approach a tap to drink water. So you see, it is what? Somewhere it must have struck him. It must have thought, why can't we think of this? So you see, if you start thinking of that, suppose tomorrow you start dreaming, why can't we have, let's say, stones fly in the air or something like that? I'm sure you will come up with something. So, it's just if you're looking, if there's a problem before you and you want to look for a solution. Once you start identifying the problem around you, suppose wherever you stay, if you see there is some kind of problem people are going through, and it just strikes you, can't we do something? This is how it begins. Can't we do something like this which can benefit these people? Can't there be a system where this can happen? You see, it is such thinking which has led people to think of ideas. They come up with ideas then, and that is how it works. So you tap whatever let's say whatever is around you, with the help of whatever you can build something. And that is how people are doing it. Okay, so that's how. So you must see what creativity or what potential you have, and I'm sure all of us have. It's just that you need to tap that. You have to look into that. And this will only happen if you think, actually. You see, if you see a problem before you and you ignore and you just walk away, you will not think of looking for a solution for that problem. It is only when you see a problem around you, you see there is, okay, there is a problem. These people have trouble, or this is the difficulty people face. Why can't I think of some solution for them? So once you see that, so you see, that is why experience, go out, see what are the problems people are facing. You see, so once you see that, if you look at, we are from the School of Languages and Literatures, you see, and you see, it was seen that, it is only people with privileged backgrounds who had access to English education who went on to do well in, academics, or went on to get good jobs and all that. So it became so that it's only people with English could actually, they had access. So what the NEP does is that why just, restrict it to a certain class of people who only have access to English education? Why can't we make knowledge available to all the vernaculars? Hence the emphasis now so much on translations, that let's make knowledge available in all the languages. So you see, a person who is from an underprivileged background will also have access to the same information and knowledge. And it is said that in China, if the products have to be sold, it has to be first put into the Chinese language in order for the products to be available in the market. So that what is happening is you are making that accessible to all people. Okay, so you're not restricting knowledge to people with only a particular language. You see, so these are ways where you can think of creatively, how to make you actually move towards a society which is equitable, which is there is equality, where there is, because you see, ultimately it leads to the development of the entire society. As I said right at the beginning, it is ultimately to make a better society where it benefits all. Education benefits all. It should not be for a select group of people. You see, so that is how we can bring about a betterment in society. So that's how it works.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? This is Divyanshi Srivastav. Yes, Divyanshi.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, I wanted to ask you about what are the core principles of the Nyaya system of thought?
They basically look, all systems of thought ultimately talk about liberation, calm moksha ultimately. So, but how do you go about achieving that? How do you go about achieving that ultimate reality? But most of it is this epistemological system that it emphasizes on, as to how you arrive at valid knowledge. It basically talks about, as I said, it's also a Tark Shastra. It tells you the rules of critical debate. If you read the Nyaya Sutras, there are different, let's say, topics, the philosophical topics, as I said, Padarth, 16 Padarth, and each are defined as to how someone can also go about arguing in the wrong way, okay, and still be correct. So you have to be careful of all those rules of debating. So if you are a person interested in debating and all the skills of debating, you can read the text which lays on each and every aspect of debating. It also, as I talks about the four main points, as I said, perception, inference, testimony, and comparison. And of course, it also talks about it possesses the existence of God. Okay, so this is basically what the Nyaya Sutras talk about. Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
so basically, it is an epistemological system. It is a means of how do you arrive at right knowledge through the right kind of inquiry.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering all the questions very patiently. Before we end the session, I would like to request everyone to fill the feedback form and complete the assignment given within 24 hours.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you all for tomorrow's session by Professor Siddharth Singh, Department of English, Sri Jain MPG College, Lucknow, on the topic From Ancient Stories to Nurturing Careful Conduct in Modern Times, Indian Knowledge System and Panchatantra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being here for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deepshika. It's nice to connect. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Bye, ma'am. Thank you.